right. We are now live.
We're live. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the 2020 Organic Seed Alliance virtual field walk. Yesterday we shared with you all some of our corn breeding and research going on. Today we're going to talk about quinoa and buckwheat trials that we're conducting in 2020. Are we live? Okay. Good morning, everyone. We are live. This is new for us, virtual Instagram field day. We're out here at the research farm in Chimacum, Washington, where we conduct variety trials, plant breeding projects, increase some seed of some of our breeding lines. Most importantly, this is also a place where we normally bring together farmers and eaters and other stakeholders to talk about seed and to talk about their food crops. Normally this time of year we would be having a live field walk and tour you around the fields and smell and touch and talk about all the plants. We'd also be hosting an eating session, a tasting session, but of course this year we're going to do our best to bring you out here through the virtual connection of Instagram. So today's crops, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about quinoa and buckwheat. Two small grains that are important for regional food resilience, good rotation crops for local farmers. It's also two crops that our local farmers dry farm. So it's an important option for rotation with our vegetable crops, especially in an era of climate change. And we're fortunate to partner with Washington State University Sustainable Seed Systems Lab, collaborating on research on these two crops. WSU has been working for several years with our local farmers out here on the Olympic Peninsula to evaluate different breeding lines for adaptation to our climate. We now have several growers that grow quinoa commercially for national food companies. And again, it has provided a dry farm option for them as a great rotation with their veg crops. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the traits that we're looking at in the buckwheat trials this year, some of the breeding objectives that are directing the work, and then we're going to talk a little bit about buckwheat. That's a new crop for us, and it's an exciting new collaboration with some international partners on Culinary buckwheats. Once we look at some of the plants in here in the greenhouse, we're going to head out to the field and we'll show you the crops that are still standing out in the field. And in the meantime, Katie Miller, our Organic Seed Alliance field assistant who manages a lot of our field trials and seed harvest, is going to give you a little demonstration on quinoa cleaning, seed cleaning. Good morning, Katie.
Hi.
All right, so let's take a look at some of these quinoa plants. Quinoa is an incredibly diverse crop. The center of origin in the Andes has populations from high latitude to low latitude, and from a north and south longitude, there's a lot of differences in the centers of origin and the diversity of crops that have been maintained by indigenous farmers there for centuries. Some of the traits we're looking at here in Washington State, particularly in Western Washington, where we have such a mild climate, is the timing of maturity, whether or not they actually complete their cycle and put a good seed set on before the fall rains come. So monitoring for that, one of the things we look at out in the field repeatedly is whether or not we have any premature sprouting going on. Here you can see some of the crops are already dropping their seed. And what we look for in checking for premature sprouting is to see if any of the seed have the little
Radicals.
the root radicals starting to emerge from the end of the seed, which would be happening about right here. I don't see any good examples in this pile. Do you, Katie?
No, I haven't seen any on these.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
We got a little bit of dew this morning.
We've had a little bit of rain, but not too much. It's been a pretty dry September and August, which is what you want for maturing the crop. The other traits we look for, and these traits were identified by local growers in terms of what they want to see in a variety. It's desirable, particularly with that moisture that we get, some of the dewiness that can lead to premature sprouting and disease. It's desirable to have a kind of open floret structure. This is the type of structure that our WSU partners call Amarantha flora, which if you think about an amaranth flower, has that nice open, almost Christmas tree type architecture. You can compare that to a more dense floret, and you can even see between these two, these are two different varieties, but you can even see that the one that has a denser floret, it may be a little more mature, but it also looks like it has a little bit of mold starting to form in the floral structure there. So an open flower structure is desirable, but also you want a nice dense seed set within that too. So here's one that has somewhat of a combination of both. It does have a pretty dense flower canopy up here, but it also has some of that open branching, and you can see there's a lot of concentrated seed set in this stalk. Some of the other qualities that we're looking for out in the field is ensuring that they don't lodge or fall over in the middle of any kind of wind event. And of course, all of these different quinoa lines have different colors of seed, different nutritional qualities. So once we evaluate in the field and we evaluate those floral structures and harvest timing, we actually take samples of each of these lines and we harvest them very carefully and send them back to WSU, where the Sustainable Seed Systems Lab is analyzing them for nutritional quality, including their mineral content. See, you want to take a look at some of the seed?
Oh yeah, this is redhead. I cleaned this yesterday. But I also wanted to, Mick, is this a lygus bug?
Oh, yes, that is. Lygus is a notorious pest of Quinopodiaceae plants, particularly quinoa, and they like to suck the juice out of the seeds themselves. We don't tend to get many lygus in our climate compared to warmer, drier areas, but they can occur.
I only noticed them on these two varieties. These were the two latest maturing varieties.
Mm-hmm.
This one is some breeding work from WSU that's for leaf color. It's not being bred for seed production, and I wonder if that's why the lygus are going for the seeds. But here's some redhead. Yeah. This seed originally came from Wild Garden and was part of our border row.
I believe the purple is actually, it's a breeding line that comes from Peru, and WSU is evaluating it for its use as a culinary green. Kevin was sharing that I believe in Rwanda, where he's worked with some collaborators, that it's more common to eat the greens as a vegetable crop. And as you can see, this variety in particular has beautiful purple, lush green leaves that would be eaten much like spinach.
The seeds of quinoa are covered in saponins, which are kind of like soap, and need to be processed by soaking and rinsing quite a lot before they're edible. We might do some of that with some of these. We harvested seed off of each plot to
do some taste testing.
Some taste testing.
Yeah. These trials were planted, these quinoa varieties were planted this year as a partnership with the WSU Seed Systems Lab for the intent of having a field walk at the International Quinoa Conference, which happened in August. And of course, this year it went virtually. So we worked with WSU breeders, our partners there, to create a little video explaining a little more detail about each of these breeding lines, the history of them, the varieties that have been identified as best fit by our local farmers. And we discussed a little bit about the future breeding potential. So if you check out on YouTube, the International Quinoa Conference WSU Sustainable Seed Systems Lab. There's a whole lot of YouTubes on all of the talks that were given at the conference. And if you search with the tag OS Organic Seed Alliance, you'll find a YouTube describing more information about the results of these variety trials. We look forward to sharing more with you in the future about where we go with it and what kind of breeding opportunities will come out of this year's evaluations.
Should we talk a little bit about buckwheat while we're here?
Sure, yeah.
I pulled a few varieties of buckwheat out for us to look at. Our buckwheat trials are exciting, partly because it's another opportunity for us to work with the Sustainable Seed Systems Lab, and also because last winter we went down to the Culinary Breeding Network event and worked with Bonnie Morales of KACHKA, a Russian restaurant in Portland, Oregon. We had grown all these French cabbages, which you'll hear about tomorrow, and we had gotten the seed kind of late in the season, and then we had to hot water treat them to deal with blackleg, and they weren't quite headed up by the time we sent them to her in the winter, which resulted in the cabbage leaves being kind of open. She decided to make cabbage rolls out of them, and she filled the cabbage rolls with buckwheat. They tasted like they had sausage in them, and I asked her, Bonnie, what did you put in these? And she said, it's buckwheat. And then Michaela had a conversation with her and found out that Bonnie has trouble sourcing culinary buckwheat in the United States. Then, when we found out that the Sustainable Seed Systems Lab was doing buckwheat trials, we thought, oh, this is a great opportunity. Farmers love growing buckwheat. Most organic farmers grow buckwheat in rotation as a cover crop. It fixes phosphorus. Most soils have plenty of mineralized phosphorus in the soil, but farmers tend to add phosphorus fertilizers anyway because it's difficult for some plants to absorb the mineralized phosphorus, resulting in over-fertilization and phosphorus running into our water systems. Buckwheat has this amazing capability to excrete acids from its roots, which solubilizes the phosphorus. It takes the phosphorus into its plant body, and then when it dies and decomposes, it makes that phosphorus available to the subsequent crop plants that might not have the same ability to solubilize the phosphorus. It's also amazing because it grows really quickly, providing a thick mat that competes really well with weeds. It's also a great insectary crop. When the buckwheat was in full flower, the honeybees were all over it. So we're excited to work on developing a buckwheat that can be used as a cover crop in the Pacific Northwest and hopefully harvested as a grain crop, so that farmers can both harvest, use it as a cover crop and harvest it as a grain crop, and ideally use it in these culinary forms that Bonnie would be excited about. So here's a couple of interesting ones. One of our plots was very weedy, but this one, Ziva, outcompeted all of the weeds. It's a little bit later. Nashes came from variety trials with the Sustainable Seed Systems Lab many years ago. Oh, with OSA. Okay, you can jump in whenever you need to, Michaela.
Okay, you're doing great.
Thanks. So we sourced a bunch of buckwheat varieties, planted them out at Nash's, evaluated them. Nash grabbed a handful of each variety that he liked as stock seed, and then later mowed down everything that he didn't like, combined the rest, and that became his cover crop seed. So this is the progeny of that project. We have it growing right now as a cover crop.
That was around 2010, so it's about 10 years old of natural selection in our climate since then.
Yeah, and the crop looks great out in the field. Good weed competitiveness. It's a little bit later, staying green later into the dry season. This is a Tartary buckwheat. Tartary buckwheat originated in the Himalayas. I also Sichuan and Yunnan province in China. I had never seen buckwheat seed that looked like this. I'm familiar with the more geometric shape seed. This one came in a little bit later. It barely has any flowers, but each of the tiny little flowers was covered in nectar. And it's used in religious ceremonies in its point of origin by the culture that stewarded it for a long time.
So this is the Tartary buckwheat, which, as you can see, has a little different shape than our traditional buckwheat. It's also a small, very, very dense seed.
Shall we do a seed cleaning demonstration?
Let me just add a couple more points here. That was awesome, Katie. I really appreciate just sort of the overview of buckwheat and the potential of buckwheat in our region. Again, buckwheat is grown by a lot of our local farmers for its ecosystem services, meaning that, as Katie said, that it improves your soil. It's got good weed competitiveness. It also provides pollen and nectar for not only honeybees, but for beneficial insects like parasitic wasps and hoverflies. But often growers grow buckwheat just for those benefits at an economic loss in terms of a crop harvest. So as Katie was sharing, we were really excited to meet Bonnie, a Russian chef that is working with buckwheat in all these culinary applications. A lot of the world eats buckwheat because it's highly nutritious, and many, many cultures around the world have traditional food preparations around buckwheat, from noodles in Japan to crepes in France, right? So while we were at the Culinary Breeding Network event and working with Bonnie, which we were really excited to connect with her, we also had a visit from our friend from EcoBreeds, an organic breeding program going on in Europe. And in much of Europe, in Eastern Europe, where our contact is located, buckwheat is a very important staple food crop. It's also grown in France. Again, a lot of the countries throughout Europe, buckwheat is a regular food crop and not just a cover crop. So this project was in partnership with WSU, but also in collaboration with EcoBreed's program in Europe. And the variety trials we're collaborating on are entries that came from the Czechoslovakian seed bank and some other European seed sources. Kevin Murphy from WSU has also been working for several years to build new breeding populations, combining different Russian culinary breeding lines, or Russian culinary varieties of buckwheat, I should say. So we're excited to kind of see where this project goes and what the potential might be to develop some markets to add the diversity of our local food resilience, our local farming resilience, by including small grains in our rotations. Katie's going to share a little bit more out in the field.
As we walk out to do the seed cleaning demo with Katie, I want to point out a few things. We are in our propagation greenhouse, which this time of year is our seed drying greenhouse. We have lots of different seeds here. We've got a bunch of different beans. This one right in front of Michaela is actually Tulsi basil. We've got some cabbage. We have the quinoa. And a few things to note here. We have a shade cloth over our greenhouse, because if the greenhouse gets more than about 90 degrees, it can be damaging to seed. Since seed is a living, breathing entity, we need to take care of it. And one of the things it needs is to not get too hot. Another thing I want to point out here is this is a polyspun geotextile fabric, and it's wonderful for seed harvest and processing. As you can see, it's a little bit see-through. it is permeable to water. So if you have it out in the field on the ground and you get a light rain or some morning dew, it will actually permeate through the fabric and not just pool and have your seeds sitting there in a pool of water. So we use it also to just keep our seeds safe and together underneath. These tables are made with pallets and just set on sawhorses and 2x4s. This is a really great way to do greenhouse tables. We can take them apart. They're really easy to move. We can set them up in different orientations, and we can take them down when we need more space and more area for moving around. So the fabric also helps us keep the seeds from getting lost through those slats in the table.
Just really quickly, quinoa cleaning. Start with a rough screen. I'll save that for more threshing. And then slightly more fine screen. Thanks, Nick.
So there, Katie, you want to talk about how the seed is going through and the chaff and the undesirables are staying on the top of the screen.
One more container. Put that in there for now. Put that in there.
I don't want to forget through it.
You want to wear a mask, not only for COVID, but when you're cleaning quinoa seed, because that fine dust can contain some of those saponins Katie was talking about earlier. Not good for your lungs.
Dan was saying that he's had some pretty serious irritations, skin irritations from cleaning quinoa seed. So we try to use protection while we're doing it. Luckily, there's
Cayenne
lots of
peppers and quinoa. Masks are good for both.
Sure.
Okay, how's that?
That's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and then we winnow. I set up this fan, but it might be good wind for it. We'll see. I don't know. Oh, pretty good. Right into ABBA.
So the process of winnowing is using the wind to separate the seed from the chaff by weight. So the heavier seed falls down into the bin where you're capturing your good clean seed, and the wind takes the chaff and the dirt and the bits of ground up plant matter and just carries it right away. It's a very beautiful and elegant cleaning step and process that is used all over the world.
Oh, this is really nice wind for this.
You also want to note that Katie is doing this over a tarp so that if there was a blast of wind or we lost some of the seed and it went outside of the bin, we can recapture it on the tarp if we need to. And as you can see, this third round, the seed is very clean. With a little bit of screening and a little bit of winnowing, you can go from really rough threshed, just out of the field seed to something that's really quite clean.
That's pretty good. It could use a little more work, but I'll save that for later. Thanks. Okay, now we're gonna walk out into the field and take a look at the quinoa plants that are still standing.
And along the way, I'm just going to remind you all of what's coming up later this week. Right over here, we have the carrot cages. These are our carrot seed pollination cages. We will be talking about those on Friday, so tune in to learn more about that breeding work. And tomorrow will be tomatoes. Yep. Thursday will be brassicas. Right over here as we walk by, we're walking by the purple sprouting broccoli.
Purple sprouting broccoli.
We have a collard trial. We have a bunch of cabbages from the French seed bank that we'll be showing and talking about. And then tomorrow will be all about tomatoes. That's our farm mascot, Malcolm the dog. Tomorrow will be all about tomatoes. Tune in, and here we are. This part of the field is right along the major road here in Chimacum. We're right next to the downtown bustling center of Chimacum. So hopefully the road noise won't be too distracting for you and we won't stay out here long, but we want to show you what this looks like in the field.
So these quinoa trials have already been harvested and evaluated throughout the season. But there are a number of different varieties in here. I just wanted to point out a couple of those other traits that we look for in the field. As I mentioned, we want to avoid things that easily lodge. We've had a little bit of rain and wind, and some things definitely tip over a lot faster than others. There's also some varieties that are a little later. This variety here is still maturing, doesn't quite have, it's very, very moist. Doesn't really have fully matured seed yet. I can feel a lot of moisture in that bud. That's not what you want this time of year in September. As I mentioned earlier, we also look at that seed set, how thick the buds are, how dense they are. You want a combination of a lot of seed, but also a semi-open structure in order to keep a little airflow. And next to this quinoa patch is some of the buckwheat. And again, this trial has been harvested, but it was just amazing to see the amount of diversity. Some of those breeding lines have pink flowers, some of them have big seeds, some of them have smaller, tighter seed heads. You know, just a lot of diversity, as Katie mentioned. They really varied in their weed suppression, how prostrate the leaf growth was, helping with some competition with weeds in the field. And we're excited to see what so on the buckwheat, let me mention this. We're harvesting the seed, which will be evaluated for the nutrition of the seed, including important traits like rutin, which is an important nutritional element of buckwheat, and also being evaluated for their phosphorus content. So we took soil samples and plant foliar samples that will all be evaluated to document which ones are doing the best job at uptaking that phosphorus and accumulating it in the plant for the following crop, that important soil building trait that Katie was talking about earlier. So we look forward to sharing more results as we complete the season.
We're a half an hour in. Do you want to do onions?
Sure, briefly. What do you think?
Sure. All right, you guys walk over. I'll go put these signs in.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that was quinoa and buckwheat, day 2 of the virtual field tour. Tomorrow, tomatoes on Wednesday. Thursday, all about brassicas. Friday, carrots, both the roots and the seed production. If you want to stay tuned in, please continue watching, and little surprise field tour opportunity. Lori McKenzie is going to show you some of the onions that have just recently been harvested from our variety trials as part of the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative. Storage onions was a crop that the local farmers asked for more information and more trial results. So we have those trials on several local farms, and we just harvested the onion trial at the Organic Seed Alliance Research Farm. Come take a look.
So welcome to another one of our greenhouses where we have just recently completed our storage onion trial harvest. So we've got all of our different varieties laid out here. We haven't done any evaluations on them or taken any notes yet, but there are some things to see. So we thought we'd bring you in here and give you a little bonus. This is a red cipollini onion that we have been working on for several years, doing some selections, and I just wanted to show you some of the things that we're selecting for and against. So these ones here, my left hand, are good examples of what we're selecting for. A few things to note here: they have a nice thin neck, which means they'll dry down well, and that one's a little thicker, but it's nice and pliable. So it'll dry down well and won't be allowing disease or moisture to get in there. We also like a rounded shoulder and a rounded bottom. That's mostly for just processing in the kitchen. It's much easier to cut it off if there's a little bit of curve there versus something like this where the curve is actually concave, and that just makes it a little harder to deal with in the kitchen and a little more loss, and we don't want that if we can avoid it. So we have nice rounding on both the top and the bottom. I like these nice bigger ones. Cipollinis are in general a roasting onion. So these are two examples of what we'll keep. And we'll keep those in storage until next year. We'll plant them out in the spring. Onions are a biennial crop, so it spends 1 year making a storage root like this, where it stores up all the energy it needs to go into its reproductive phase. And when we plant them out next year, they'll throw up these beautiful bolting stalks, which actually Katie can show you. She's standing right there by a variety that has already bolted. That's something we want to select against. If it bolts in the year that we're trying to make the bulb, that's not desirable because it makes the bulb lower quality for eating. So we're also looking for single bulbs. You can see this one kind of has a lobed appearance. That means it has multiple bulbs in there. So these we'll eat and enjoy and not keep for seed. So these are some of the varieties. I think we've got about, Katie, remind me, 13 or so.
That sounds right.
Varieties in the trial. And our growers here were really interested in open pollinated varieties. So varieties that not only would produce well and store well and have good eating and culinary qualities, but also something that they could produce their own seed on if they wanted to. And that lends to security just on the farm, as well as regional resiliency, because every time you're saving seed on your farm or in your garden or in your backyard, you are naturally adapting and evolving with those plants to perform really well in this environment. So anytime you're doing that, you're doing a little bit of plant breeding and you're doing some co-evolution and adaptation. So we really like that. Hybrids are also great. There's some really good varieties out there. There's some really good companies breeding hybrid varieties. But this trial was focused on open pollinated material. So it looks like we've got some really good things going on here. I would say this one, this clear dawn, looks beautiful. You can see that the bulbs are nice and big. So far they look quite uniform. We're not exactly sure what causes this. We're seeing some of that growth busting out of the bottom, but that's also something that we want to select against. Again, Katie can show you that Rinsberger 5 Bingo. That's one that's not going to be well adapted to here. You can see the bulbs are kind of small. There's a lot of diversity in the bulb shape. We've got several that have bolted. That means they think they've already gone through the winter and they think it's time to make seed. That's not what we want them to be doing right now. And so we're looking for varieties where we get lots of good bulbs. So we have a high return on getting marketable bulbs that are high quality, both in production and in storage. So we'll be storing these for at least 3 or 4 months. We'll check on them about once a month and take notes and pull out any bulbs that have gone bad or are showing mold. And then we'll have a report to share with all of our farmers and all of you about which ones stored well, which ones look great, and we may even taste them all, but that's a lot of onions to taste.
Too bad it's not smell-o-vision because this smells great in here. I like the look of this Reinsberger too. Isn't that one of the biodynamic varieties?
Yeah,
Yep,
you want to talk
that's
about it?
from
From
City.
It's from Bingenheimer. Bingenheimer is a biodynamic seed company in Germany. And this one, they're actually a very similar latitude to where we're located as well. And I really like the round shape. This is a biodynamic open pollinated variety. It's got that nice dry neck like Lori was talking about. So one to watch.
So we just got a question online that says, would the Reinsberger be better suited for a warmer climate or maybe a lower latitude? That's a great question. Onions go into their reproductive phase both after an accumulation of cold and depending on the day length. And my understanding would be that would want a longer day.
Well, these look pretty good to me. I don't see
No,
any bolting.
this one. Sorry, the Reinsberger 5. This one that has the bolting.
We have two different Reinsbergers,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good lesson in and of itself. A name is not always a name. So this Reinsberger, this is from Sativa, I think, right? SAT 25?
Yeah, actually.
From Sativa, another biodynamic company in Switzerland. And I don't see any of that bolting in this population.
No, the question is about this one.
Right. So, yes, if we see that early bolting, it could be a combination of temperature sensitivity and day length. And if you're...
I actually think that if we had planted these a little bit later, we wouldn't have seen the same amount of bolting and probably would have seen a similar amount of bulb production. I think that they got just enough vernalization in the spring while it was still cold.
Yeah. And that's another good point. Actually, we're challenged where we are here in the Pacific Northwest to grow really storage onions reliably because we have long days and a somewhat short growing season, and that can make it really challenging because we want enough time for the bulbs to grow, but we get pretty long days fairly early on. So onions can either be short day, long day, or intermediate day onions. And that mostly relates to when the bulb formation starts. So a short day onion will start forming a bulb with a short day length. An intermediate is 12 to 14 hours days, I think, and it starts forming a bulb. And then long day onions take a really long day.
14 hours is our length.
14, we get 14 to 15 hour days. So generally we're growing the intermediate types here. We don't want to do short days because they'll just start bulbing way too young and they won't have enough plant energy to form a really nice bulb.
Good.
All right. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're glad that we worked out some of our technical glitches and we're excited to see you tomorrow. So have a great day and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.